Do you think books are more rich than movies? Do you think books have a higher capacity for depth? Well, you've been lied to.
In this video, I want to explain a hierarchy of mediums, and I want to explore the idea of a universal medium for art. And further, I'd like to talk about some of the issues inherent with mediums that are more universal than other mediums. I don't want to persuade you. I just want to share the ideas, and I hope somebody can hear and find and correct a bunch of misconceptions that I have about this topic. A movie necessarily has the complete capacity of any book. And this can be shown in a very simple way. So a movie, we're just going to define very simply, it's visuals and audio. That's it. And a book is just text, sometimes some visuals. Keep it simple. So in the most basic sense, any of the text in a book can be read aloud and converted to an audiobook, for example. And that audio could be played in a movie. That audio can be played alongside visuals of any sort, any arbitrary visuals. So it could be visuals that are related to it, or it could just be a blank black screen, and that would encompass all of a book. Alternatively, you could just have the text on the screen, so that covers the visuals, and you can have any arbitrary audio to go along with it, or no audio to go along with that. And that would be a movie that encompassed all of the book again. So any regular book, pretty much almost any book that exists, could be very easily converted directly into a movie. And that's just the basics of it. Beyond that lowest level conversion, any text can be converted into other forms of visuals, not directly just the text again on screen. You can have any other combination of visuals and audio to convey the same thing that a text would convey. Like text, what I mean is any audio and visual combination can convey the same thing that letters on a page would convey. Some things might be difficult to convey with other forms of visuals and audio from text, but that's just the limit of the creativity of the artist. But otherwise, you can still, it might take time and creativity to figure out how, but you could transfer anything from regular text into other forms of visuals and audio. So you automatically have some more richness, and then you can add other things in addition to that. So movies are necessarily more rich than books are.
But you said earlier, quote, any regular book, pretty much almost any book, could be converted to a movie, unquote. Why the hedging?
Well, there is the case, and this makes my point a little bit more difficult to defend, but there are some books that utilize the unique qualities of the medium, which cannot be replicated in a movie. So, for example, if a book is using the fact of the size of the book, using the fact of the weight of the book as a part of the narrative, then that cannot be replicated by a movie, bringing attention to the fact that a book is a physical object. There's this book, House of Leaves, which I might talk about a lot. There's a portion in the very beginning of the book, and it says that the previous edition did not have Braille, and it's very ambiguous about if the current edition has Braille or not. And it's just a silly thing to throw into the book, but it again, it brings attention to the fact that the book is a physical object that can be touched. Now, I'm a person, I don't read Braille, I read with my eyes. I don't know how to read Braille, I don't know anything about it, but I know that you can touch it. So having a book and looking for places where you can touch and see if there's any indents or raised or whatever, that is an interesting little detail that adds something that could not be added by a movie. It wouldn't make any sense to say the movie is partially in Braille because you can't touch a movie. I might define a medium as the necessary qualities that are within the medium and the unique qualities that distinguish it from other mediums. And books do have a lot of unique qualities, but they aren't often used when people write books. So that's why I'm kind of going into this almost, generally speaking, we don't have books that utilize the unique qualities of a book. And so they don't have to be books. they could be movies. And the richness can be totally encompassed by something else, even just an audiobook. A book can be mostly easily translated to an audiobook, but not necessarily all books, but generally regular books. And of course, in addition to that, movies have many unique qualities which cannot be translated back to books. Now, I don't want to go into all the details of whichever unique qualities each of them have, but just note that there are unique qualities of books and movies and any other medium, music and so on, that could not be replicated within any other medium. And those could be highlighted. And that's where the true richness lies. But we still have an issue here. And that's because most people feel that books are more rich than movies. Generally, they happen to be, and they can be, and they have more richness. And why is that? What is the problem? What is the cause of people thinking that books are more rich than movies?
So my thinking about this was sparked by Ben and Vaden from the Increments podcast.
So let's actually listen to what triggered me in the first place, and we can continue from there. Note that the clip has been edited to remove some context, so it does not accurately reflect their thinking on the subject. I'm just using this to bounce off my ideas.
Honestly, my sense is that most people would agree, like, a day spent reading, at the end of the day, you feel differently. You feel better than you do at the end of a day spent binge watching your favorite show, even if like each moment binge watching the show felt pleasurable. I feel like the Deutschians would want to say, like, whatever you're doing with your attention, it's for a reason. You have some implicit theory about why you should be doing it. Like watching Game of Thrones is like equally good as like reading, reading Popper or whatever. But it does seem like, in terms of like what fulfilled you at the end of the day, I do get more lasting fulfillment out of like sort of reading a novel and grappling with the ideas than I do about like binge watching Game of Thrones, right? Part of me is like wondering if the reason for this is that like if you're binge watching these types of shows, they tend to have like more simple patterns than novels or something.
I think the books that you tend to read have gone through the test of time to a longer degree, and you're more likely to read books that have engaged the mind and hence have stay on the shelves. So if you randomly grab a book off the shelf that's been recommended to you by a friend, I think there's a higher probability of getting something with much richer content because it's stood the test of time compared to television, which you can capture our attention using more salacious means. It has to be the force of the ideas and the writing that holds attention in fiction. But on the screen, you can use gore and you can use smut and you can use lighting and all that. And that is kind of just cheaper ways of holding and gaining your attention. So I think that you're likely to be dealing with richer ideas when you deal with books over cinema.
I want to watch Barry Lyndon and Speed Racer out of spite for this comment about lighting. It's crazy. There's so many unique and sophisticated ways to capture attention using lighting that are not cheap tricks. They aren't just hippie traps. It's not just setting a fire and having a strobe light. There's just so much sophistication. I was recently reading something from Fritz Lang about his use of lighting in Metropolis and how people were, some American filmmakers were a bit jealous of it and thinking that they couldn't do it, but they could. In any case, that's just a side note. It's just a digression.
Well, I highly doubt Vaden's point actually hinges on lighting specifically. It's not really about lighting. But you heard what he actually said in the edited clip. But I was going to restate it and paraphrase it. Any randomly selected book which was recommended will have richer content than a randomly selected TV show from a streaming service. And that richness of content is why a person will feel better after reading a book and feel worse after watching TV all day. So for now, let's focus on the richness comparison between the books and movies.
I think this is a mistake. And I think the mistake is using the standards of a more narrow form of art to evaluate a more universal form of art. There is an interesting question about why all the replicable aspects of a book are not well replicated or well emphasized in a movie. But going beyond that, there's no reason to only evaluate a movie by the standards of that you would evaluate a book. And that is the error. It would be similar if I used only the standards of evaluating a painting to evaluate a movie, which you can tell doesn't really make a lot of sense because a movie is multiple frames and a painting would be a singular frame. And there are a lot of different things that you might want to evaluate with a painting versus a movie. Another simple example of this is within the same medium, but different genres. If we think about evaluating classical era music by the standards of Baroque music, we would find that the classical era music is not very rich. The themes don't work very well. In fact, there are too many themes. They're not explored in the proper way. They're not explored enough. They're not changed and fragmented and interacting with themselves enough. We would find that classical era music is not very rich. And the same is if we take a look at modern pop music and evaluate it by the standards of classical era music, we find that the melodies are not very good. We find that the harmonies are not very well fleshed out or explored. The rhythm is pretty stale, and so on and so forth. We find that modern music is not very rich, but that's only because we're using the previous standards. However, if we were to evaluate classical era music with the modern standards, modern pop music standards of evaluation, and we would find why they're so limiting in terms of not using instruments very well, not using a lot of instruments, having no variety of instrumentation, and so on, being stuck using only acoustic instruments that can be played live. You can tell, obviously, that anything that could happen, any of the richness that is available within Baroque music or classical music is available for modern pop music, but none of that would be available for classical era music or for Baroque era music. None of the standards of evaluation that are available for modern music would be available for those past forms of music. So I think it is very clear and easy to say that the available richness for modern music is much greater than that of classical music, and indeed that the actual richness, the fulfilled richness of modern pop music is much greater than that of even the greatest classical era of music. I think that we're just not prepared to express our appreciation of modern arts and as rich a detail and in standard English as well as we can do with older classical era or even other eras of art.
Now, I should mention my bias. I'm not much of a reader, nor do I watch a lot of TV. I don't have a TV, I don't have any streaming services. I like to schedule time to watch movies, but I rarely do it. So I've actually never had this feeling of fatigue from binge watching TV shows all day, and I've never had this pleasure of reading a book all day. I also actively want to find new ways to appreciate beauty in the arts, and I want to encourage others to find new ways to appreciate beauty in the arts. And it can be any arts. It could be Twitter, it could be Instagram, it could be the fine arts, it could be streaming TV shows. So I just want to encourage that. And I do think that technological advances have led to increased richness of art, the increased possibility for richness of art, and I want that to continue. So I imagine that bias has some influence on why I have the opinion that I do have.
I do think that there tends to be some issue with appreciating certain new forms of art that leading to some type of fatigue. I can understand the feeling of fatigue that might happen when appreciating different forms of art. And I think that a part of that might be because we have a dissonance between the way that we explicitly appreciate the art and the way that we inexplicitly appreciate the art. So if we don't have any language, or we don't even have a beginnings of any language to describe the richness of viewing modern new TV shows, for example, we then feel fatigued because there's a fighting between the richness that we might feel inexplicitly and the richness that we actually feel explicitly, right? This gets to the idea of a guilty pleasure that people feel. You have an explicit idea that it's bad, but you have the inexplicit idea that it's good, for example, and you like it, but you feel guilty about it. And that might lead to some fatigue. And then, after experiencing that guilty pleasure for all day, you might feel bad, for example. I think that might be a major aspect of the problem of feeling not so good after watching TV all day versus the feeling of reading a book all day. Because you have the explicit ideas that reading a book is good, and you have the inexplicit experience of enjoying the book at the same time. Of course, I'm not so sure about this. I'm just wanting to progress the conjecture that you had initially and having some fun with it. But I can imagine very easily, like, if somebody explicitly appreciates something and has easy language for it, but they don't inexplicitly appreciate it, right? They don't have any of the emotional appreciation of it, let's say. Well, you can see how that wouldn't be very good at all. That's a no good. That's no bueno. And the opposite, of course, of somebody who has no language to appreciate something, no explicit language, but they appreciate it inexplicitly, and maybe they even have explicit reasons to dislike it. You can see how both of those scenarios would lead to some sort of energy drain and like just feeling of the conflict in the mind. So I think it does somewhat explain the phenomena that you guys were talking about.
Now, after disagreeing so much, I want to highlight the parts where I do agree.
I look forward to a time where we have a universal medium of art that can encompass all other forms of art, and it can spark any of our senses arbitrarily and even create new senses, something of that nature. But I do fear that there will be some form of neglect or seeming neglect that would be highlighted, which is the same issue that happens if you have a more universal form, such as movies, neglecting the detail and the richness that is available for books, right? It's not usually converted very well and then added on top of. And I think that would happen in the ways that we evaluate it will be a bit strained. So with some form of universal art, we won't have any necessary qualities of the medium because it's a universal medium and it can do anything. And perhaps every work of art will be unique with some unique qualities. And that would just cause problems. It'd be difficult to evaluate by any normal way that we evaluate typical mediums currently. I think the worst culprit of this right now is video games. Right, we have 100 years of cinema. We've got 200 years of photographs. We've got 300 years of painting on canvas, and we've got even longer of any other visual depictions. And we still don't have video games that you properly use framing. Like, we don't have video games that know how to arrange things on a screen to look beautiful. They do awful at it. They completely neglect that, but obviously they're neglecting that in favor of paying attention to gameplay and how to interact with the game. Obviously, there are other aspects of games that are more important, apparently, to the developers of the games. And I think that would extend, if we have some sort of universal art with some interesting, new, unique element to it for each individual work of art, you might only pay attention to those unique elements and then completely neglect all of the other things that come along for the ride, in the same way that a movie kind of neglects the narrative of what you can get from a book. And I think that is one of the reasons why if you pick up a random book that's on the shelf at a library, it is more likely to seem rich than if you watch a random TV show on a streaming service, because of this tendency to neglect the previous standards. That was so much fun to think about and talk about. I really hope my thoughts were somewhat clear, even if they weren't. It was just exciting for me to write all that down and then talk about it. One day, I hope that I become more. I developed skills to communicate better, and hopefully I find some people who want to talk more about this stuff too, and find anything that I say interesting or have more other interesting things to say. It kind of it inspires me. It makes me want to just tell everybody. So super happy with that. Please tell me if you have any thoughts. If you want to correct any of my errors, or if you want to just add on in addition to anything I said, please. I love it. Thank you so much for watching.